Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Water, Will There Be a Drop to Drink, co-hosted by the Prince William Conservation Alliance and the Mid-County Civic Association. My name is Ashley Studholm. I'm the Executive Director with PWCA, and I'm delighted to be joined by Martin Jeter, President of MidCo, and our guest speakers tonight, Brad White from the Department of Environmental Quality and Sam Caldwell from the U.S. Geological Survey. Before we jump into the topic today, I want to I'm asking to confirm my speaking language. Hold on. Let's do, why is English not, okay, here we go. There we go. Yeah, not speaking Arabic, I'm speaking English, so hopefully that will help anyone who is using closed captions. So before we jump into the topic today, I want to spend a brief moment on some housekeeping, and we'll start with introductions, and then our two panelists will have the opportunity to present their presentations, and that will be followed by the Q&A, and we'll open it up to everyone else here that might have questions. During the presentations, I ask that you all stay muted and turn your video off. That will help with any bandwidth problems that people might experience. That said, feel free to use the chat feature, put in your comments and questions and anything else, and we'll engage with the chat, and we'll circle back to anything that wasn't answered during the Q&A. And then, of course, during the Q&A, when we call on you and your question, please feel free to put your video back on and unmute yourself so we can have a conversation. Now, many of you might be already familiar with the Prince William Conservation Alliance, but for those that are new, I just want to take a moment to welcome you and let you know that we are an environmental grassroots nonprofit focused on protecting our historic and natural resources throughout Prince William County. And you can stay up to date with everything that we are doing by going to our website, which you can go here at pwconserve.org. And I highly encourage you to click on our calendar page. You can see that here, and that will keep you up to date in terms of the events that we have. We recently hosted a People Who Care Make a Difference Awards last Saturday. And upcoming, we have our annual North American Butterfly Survey. So if you want to get out and join a team, you don't have to know all the butterflies. We'll pair you up with an expert, and you can spend a day learning and counting butterflies. So reach out to us if you're interested in doing that.
For that screen.
And we host community programs like this one fairly frequently. And tonight's program builds on a series that we've been doing for several years on source water protection. And you can see our previous programs by going to our YouTube channel. And several years ago, we hosted a program with Dr. Steven Souza, who's an expert in lake management. And he noted that the Occoquan Reservoir, because of its ratio between the size of the reservoir and the watershed, it's really susceptible to land use changes. And he emphasized the importance of any time that we have an opportunity to not increase density and impervious surface within the watershed, we should really do that, especially since the reservoir, from his analysis and looking at the data from the Occoquan Monitoring Lab, he noted that the reservoir is starting to potentially be reaching a tipping point. And this program really, that program really focused it on surface area. And that's why I'm really excited about this conversation that we're having here tonight, because it's regarding a topic that is often overlooked because we can't readily see it. We can't see groundwater the way that we can see surface water in streams. But our groundwater plays a critical role in this county, both as a source water for many residents that they have wells and they rely on groundwater for their drinking water supply, but also it provides base flow for many of our streams that feed into the Occoquan Reservoir. And we offer these impasse programs free of charge because we think that it's really important information to have. And even though they're not free to put on, and we're able to do that because of the generosity of people like you. So if you'd like to support us and the work that we do, and you want to see more programs like this, straight from our webpage, you can click on donate, and that will take you to a secure space to donate online. And whether it's $50 or $500, I can tell you it truly, truly makes a difference. And we are community supported, and we can't do our work without you. So thank you so much. So, and I just want to emphasize that our scope of work is Prince William County, but perhaps you live outside of Prince William County. And I just want to say that because of the water resources that we have, and it's the transition zone between, the urban core of DC and the more rural areas of Fauquier, we really hold the line of development that is radiating out of DC. And so conservation efforts that happen here are really regionally significant. And so it impacts, our efforts have broad reaching impacts for the entire region. And so thank you so much for your support. And I'm greatly looking forward to learning from our expert panelists this evening and having a conversation with this community. And I will pass it on to Martin Jeter from Mid County. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley, and good evening, everyone. And welcome to the meeting tonight. Appreciate you coming. I'm Martin Jeter, president of the Mid County Civic Association, or MidCo, for those of you who don't know me. I know there's a lot of folks here that I know from MidCo. And again, for those who haven't heard of us, we're an independent citizens group that's open to everyone. We meet once a month, and we've been meeting in Zoom since COVID, but so we meet once a month, open to everyone. We're primarily interested in transparency and open government. That's what we're in the business of, trying to make sure people are aware of things ahead of time, keeping people informed on land use, transportation, and quality of life issues. Basically, we advocate for positive outcomes for residents and for the environment. I want to thank our presenters that are here tonight from USGS and the DEQ. We're really looking forward to this meeting. We've been putting this together and thinking about this for a while. I want to thank especially Ashley and Prince William Conservation Alliance for co-hosting the meeting. MidCo has worked with Ashley, and we worked with Kim Hosen prior to that for many years. And Ashley's done a great job taking over the Conservation Alliance and carrying on Kim Hosen's legacy. And she's now putting her own stamp on the organization and moving PWCA forward. And we're proud to be partnering with her and with PWCA. I want to thank some folks who are here from the Sustainability Commission. The chair, Randy Freed, and commissioners Joe Boutte and Warren Beaton are here. Just a few words on the topic tonight. Prince William County is rapidly developing, as all of you know who live in Prince William County, and the Occoquan watershed is already very urbanized with more development on the way. We have over 16,000 wells in Prince William County right now, and over 700,000 people that rely on the Occoquan Reservoir for drinking water. So this is I think, a very important topic, a very timely meeting, because there's not much data on the condition of the aquifer and what's happening to it moving forward, and not much information on different subwatersheds for the Occoquan. So we need more data and more information from the experts in order to plan ahead and to protect our water assets. And that's really what this meeting is all about. So I'll be really interested to hear from the experts on how impervious surfaces, more wells, fewer trees, more disturbed land, and more septic systems can affect the groundwater level, the recharge rate, and the water quality in general in our county. A related issue is that the Sustainability Commission that I serve on, in addition to the folks I mentioned previously, We're working on a resolution that asks the county government to do a groundwater study to gather the data that we need to have the information moving forward to protect our aquifer. And that resolution should be coming out shortly. And also related to our discussion is that this Chesapeake Bay Area Review Board that I'm also a member of is asking the county to establish an advisory group on water issues in general to advise the Board of County Supervisors on the various issues, groundwater, surface water, the river health, and so forth and so on. So I'll keep everyone posted on those things as they develop. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over. Well, I'll turn it over to Brad, who's going to do the first presentation tonight, and we'll get this show on the road. Thanks again.
Well, hey everybody. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to see so many folks that are interested in the topic. I'm with a small group in the Department of Environmental Quality called the Groundwater Characterization and Monitoring team. And we basically do our best to try and understand the groundwater resource through monitoring, primarily through groundwater levels, but also just acquiring and archiving and managing groundwater related data through GIS and so forth, groundwater sampling as well. And it's been an interesting job. I've been here since 2006. I work primarily in the Piedmont and Blue Ridge. Most of our resources are focused on the coastal plain, just because it's such an extensive aquifer system that needs to be actively managed. You know, so it's been a real treat getting to just go all over the Blue Ridge and Piedmont and see places I've never seen and work on all these different projects with all these different groups from USGS to just all sorts of different localities. So I guess let me get my presentation going here. Let's see. All right, so hopefully everybody can see that. Holler at me if you can't. I want to start with a somewhat of a disclaimer. I'm by no means an expert on local hydrogeologic conditions in Prince William County. I'm sure there are a lot of folks or some folks that are more familiar with groundwater in the county that on the work at the county level, also well drillers, consulting geologists also that are intimately acquainted with the groundwater resource. But having said that, you know, my intent of this talk is to hopefully draw on what I do know about the occurrence and movement of groundwater. Also, what I know about the work that's been done in the county in the past, and also trying to draw on some data that I have available to try and synthesize or pull together a better fundamental understanding of groundwater conditions in the county, and hopefully provide some perspective with regard to historic groundwater use as well. So the talk's basically going to focus pretty hard, or not, you know, sort of hard on the geology, and then I'm going to weave in hydro concepts into that sort of geologic framework, and then I'll bring in some observations having to do with hydrogeologic conditions, mainly associated with the relation between well yield and geology, and also groundwater quality and geology. And then I'll move on to a brief discussion about groundwater use. So here is just a general geologic map of Prince William County. A lot of you probably already know, but and it is my estimation, I'm fairly certain about this. Prince William County is the only county in Virginia that has Blue Ridge rocks, Piedmont rocks, and a coastal plain system. So in that perspective, it's really unique. The Blue Ridge obviously is, Bull Run Mountain. It's not a very big section. It's mainly quartzites and metamorphosed basalts. I believe they're the oldest rocks in the county. And they are juxtaposed in fault contact with a what's known, a geologic feature that's known as the Culpeper Triassic Basin. It's got a western margin that's faulted up against the Blue Ridge. And the basin extends all the way into Maryland and southward into Madison County. So it's a pretty extensive feature. It makes up large portions of Prince William County, Loudoun County, Culpeper County, Fauquier County. And it is currently relied on for groundwater production from a number of different sources. And in the past, it's been really heavily relied on, and we'll get more into that in a minute. To the east of the Culpeper Basin, you have what I call just like normal Piedmont crystalline rocks. I call them crystalline because they may have, in the case of Prince William, most of these rocks originated as seafloor sediments that have been scraped up and melted and pressurized, mainly with an event associated when what was ancestral African continent collided with North American plate. All these ocean sediments and small islands got caught up in the middle and basically shoved and metamorphosed up onto the continental crust. And that process of metamorphism created intense heat and pressure, and over millions of years crystallized these rocks. It actually caused mineral grains to fuse and melt together. And so all these old seafloor sediments and kind of metamorphosed volcanic rocks are, some of them, this package is also interspersed with like more granitic, more brittle type granitic rocks as well, which are represented by these plutonic shapes here. And again, it's a fairly generalized map, but what I tried to do was like break these rocks up into sort of hydrogeologic groups, which draws on an idea that was done earlier by in a USGS report that was done by Dave Nelms back in the early 90s. And then to the east, you have coastal plain sediments. And these are just depositional packages of sand, sometimes terrestrial origin, so transported from higher areas to lower, or sometimes associated with marine deposition. And that's all contingent on where sea level was at the time of deposition of these sediments. Got a cross section A to A prime here. So the next slide is going to be basically, pretend you're taking a knife and cutting into a cake, and you're going to be looking into the slice of cake from the side here. So this is basically Prince William County here in cross section. You've got Bull Run Mountains. You've got that faulted western margin where you had rocks slide downward relative to the Blue Ridge. And then you had, nature abhors a vacuum. So you had all these sediments washing off higher ground under different conditions. So you have layers of finer grain and coarser grain sediments. Oftentimes the coarser grain sediments are on the margins of this feature. You know, obviously this didn't happen all at once. It happened over a period of just rifting events where you had this down warping, sediments washing in, you know, down warping again, sediments coming in. And as a result, a lot of these beds are tilted toward the west. They dip toward the west. They've lithified or hardened, and this continued rifting and faulting eventually has stretched the crust to the point where you have introduction of magmatic rocks, diabase, which is unerupted basalt that cuts through all of these sedimentary rocks, which is fairly prominent. That's what all these red rocks are here. Diabase is very competent, very hard crystalline material. But it can fracture. We'll get into that though. And then here's the metamorphosed oceanic sedimentary rocks that are now crystalline, not to be confused with coastal plain sedimentary structures though. And then the coastal plain toward the east here, southeast portion of the county. Just to want to rewind a couple 100 million years ago and talk about a little bit more about the formation of the Culpeper Triassic Basin, because it is it's a prominent hydrologic feature in the county, and I think it deserves a little bit of, you know, special attention. This is just a representation of ancestral North America pulling apart from Africa, and you can see, you know, this is the zone of crustal thinning and rifting, and it's prominent. I mean, there's basins that run all up and down the Atlantic seaboard, all the way up into Canada. So, you know, the Culpeper Basin isn't the only one of these features. It's the largest one in Virginia that is not covered by coastal plain sediment. There are some other big ones that are buried under the coastal plain as well. Again, the Culpeper Basin in cross section, mainly this fault accommodated most of the movement, but it is faulted on the eastern side as well. All right, so kind of touched on the geology. How does groundwater interact with the geology, the varied geology in the county? Mainly in the Piedmont, you know, in the hard rock portions of the county, you have what I refer to as a dual porosity system, which is pretty much unconsolidated or extremely weathered materials mantling more competent and fractured bedrock. Now, the first way water is stored and moves through this kind of dual porosity system is in the overburden. So you have water table conditions in the overburden. In the Piedmont to the east of the Triassics, the mantle of regolith, which is a term for soil and weathered bedrock, can be fairly thick, you know, 70, 80 feet, 20 feet. It just varies depending on landscape position and what kind of rock it is that's weathering. When you get down into the bedrock, the only place you're going to find water, obviously, is in the fractures. In the Piedmont to the east of the Triassics, the occurrence of fracturing is highly variable. It's sort of occurs in very discrete pockets. It's hard to understand, really, or predict where zones of preferential fracturing are likely to occur unless you do some deeper investigation through, mapping or surface geophysics. But what I can say is that fractures tend to occur of varying orientations and densities in the Piedmont. And obviously, the more densely fractured and more extensive the fracturing is, the more groundwater is likely to be available for use. So it's entirely dependent on the level of fracturing, but also how these fractures are plumbed in to the overburden. That's important as well, because you can have a ton of fracturing and a well where you can initially pump the daylights out of it, and all of a sudden yield tapers off, and that's because it's not plugged into a sustainable source of recharge, and you have to wait for those fractures to fill back up. So and it's expensive and time consuming to really understand more about the orientation and densities of these types of fracturing, but it's pretty fascinating to me. These systems, crystalline bedrock systems, so not the Culpeper Triassic Basin, but the Piedmont to the east, tends to fracture. The majority of the fracturing occurs within, the upper 300-400 feet of rock. Once you start getting below that, you're a lot less likely to hit water. It's not to say you can't, but the odds are, most of the water in the system is definitely in the upper 300 to 400 feet. But now contrast that with sort of a more systematic style of fracturing in the Culpeper Triassic Basin, which often tends to separate along bedding. So you have all these lithified sedimentary structures that will oftentimes part along beds, especially beds of different grain size. So fine grain juxtaposed against more coarse grain beds. Oftentimes the beds will separate, not every time, obviously, but and then some units, like more competent sandstones, tend to fracture in a more vertical nature, or can. And so what you wind up with is a somewhat systematic sort of trellised network of fracturing within the Culpeper Basin that can be somewhat regional in scope and scale. Indeed, the aquifer system here does behave more regional or semi-regional in a more semi-regional sense. Another couple points to make about groundwater availability in the Triassics is that you don't have that thick mantle of overburden that you do above more crystalline type Piedmont rocks. It's usually a pretty thin layer, 10 feet, and then you're into rock a lot of times if you're drilling a well. So you don't have that storage in the top, but it also allows water to infiltrate more rapidly because it doesn't have to work through that whole layer of overburden to get down into the fracture system. Another point to make is that these rocks are open typically at greater depths. So, it's not uncommon to drill a well if you really want to get big water, hundreds of gallons a minute, 700-800 feet, and still be picking up water down at those depths. And then lastly, there's a lot to talk about here in Prince William. The coastal plain system. Basically, it's, sequences of unconsolidated sediments that have been deposited, as long ago as 60 million years in the case of the Potomac aquifer system, which is a huge regional aquifer system up and down the eastern margin of Virginia. It's in some cases, 1,000+ feet thick. In the case of Prince William County, you're right on the edge of it. That's not to say you can't drill a well in this and get really high yields, but you're in the up dip section where you're getting fresher recharge water right along the fall zone where it's entering the Potomac system. And this is a terrestrial type sand. There's an example of, a fairly coarse sand package in the Potomac. What else? And it's capped by a confining zone of clay. So it's somewhat pressurized. Once it enters this aquifer, pressures can build up. So if you do put a well in through the confining unit, groundwater levels will rise above that confining layer. And a pressurized system is much easier to pump than a non-pressurized or a system that's open to atmospheric, because you have that pressure element that's helping to drive water. All above the Potomac, you have some marine related sediments, and that has to do with the position of the ancient sea level during time of deposition. So, you've had encroachment of the sea level in much further than it is at present day. So I don't have time to get, unfortunately, or probably fortunately, for you guys, I don't have time to really get into the weeds about, groundwater hydraulics. So just in a nutshell, water wants to move just like, any other thing under a gradient from high potential energy to low energy. So if it's in unconfined conditions, meaning open to atmosphere, it's going to want to go from higher groundwater elevation to lower groundwater elevation. Typically on the local landscape, the lowest points of elevation are streams. So a lot of times you have a fairly short transit time between time of infiltration to local drainages, but you also have a deeper component of groundwater flow that takes much longer. It doesn't always have to be centuries or millennia, it can just be years. Like in the case of getting in the fracture system in Piedmont rocks, the water's still not that old, but it enters a different realm where pressure plays a larger role. But even when the water is in a pressurized system, it still wants to move from higher energy to lower energy. And the endpoint for that lower energy is still a lot of times associated with the occurrence of a stream or a topographically low position on the landscape. So even in confined systems, the pressure head is trying to seek out the lowest source of, where can it run to? Where is the gradient going to take it? And a lot of times the answer is back to a surface water feature. Now, in the case of the deep coastal plain, they've age dated water that's, thousands of years old. So some of the paths that water takes can be quite tortuous. But, given enough time, it's going to wind back up at the top sooner or later. Sort of the same idea in cross section at the county scale. Another report by Nelms and Brockman in 1997. USGS did a series of reports on groundwater in Prince William County. I'm sure a number of you have read or are familiar with. And this figure just sort of is an idealized sort of representation of groundwater flow in the county. You know, steep topographically driven flow in the Blue Ridge or along Bull Run Mountain, shallow and deeper components of groundwater circulation in the Culpeper Basin, mainly shallower, kind of mid-level circulation in the Piedmont that may discharge to the basin, or it may discharge out to the coastal plain systems ultimately, or just the surface water feature, you know, that drains to, you know, the Occoquan or Potomac. So what's all this mean, you know, for people? This is, all these dots represent different wells that were compiled in a database that's cobbled from all sorts of different sources. And in this case, I tried to just, I think it's maybe 3,000 wells or something like that, which is just a mere fraction of the total number of wells that have been drilled in the county. But I wanted to take the existing information and just see what kind of thing I could say about, you know, where are higher yields likely to occur. Reported well yield is often something that's reported at time of construction. And just, you can see a couple things jump out at you. There's a number of wells, you know, between 100 and 735 gallons a minute that were reported at time of drilling or after a pump test, right in the Manassas Park area, a portion of the Culpeper Triassic Basin. That's a function of the geology mainly, but also the need for groundwater at one point in time. So these are all, most of them are older wells that are no longer in service. But it does illustrate that the basin is quite capable of providing pretty large amounts of groundwater if it's needed. There's also a number of, you know, orange dots, which is like 50 to 100 gallons a minute at time of drilling, which is nothing to sneeze at either in hard rock. And these are probably just residential wells that were brought in. So it's not unusual to hit pretty high yields in the Culpeper Triassic Basin, in the siltstones and shales, and also in the sandstones. Sometimes even in the diabase, depending on how it's fractured. I remember Dave used to always talk about these cross strike structures that were noticed that cut along strike of these features that he would think may serve as a pretty transmissive zones even within the diabase. Getting out into the Piedmont, the crystalline rocks of the Piedmont yields are much lower, and that has to do with just the less extensive fracturing that's there in the Piedmont. You just don't have those big transmissive semi-regional kind of fracturing networks that you do in the Culpeper Triassic Basin. And then in the coastal plain, right along the margin there, you can get into some big water there too, if you're trying to target the up-dip section of the Potomac aquifer, because at that point the sands are thick enough to exploit for groundwater. What about water quality? This is just naturally occurring geochemistry. This is a measurement of specific conductance. So this is from groundwater samples from wells that have been taken at different points in time, from probably the 60s all the way up to the, you know, mid 2000s. But it shows a pattern. It shows a trend that is associated with geology. specific conductance is a measurement of the electrical conductivity of water, and the water becomes more conductive with the more ions that are dissolved into it. So the higher the specific conductance value, the higher the concentration of dissolved ions. And so this indicates, all these red dots, indicates obviously samples that have large, higher quantities of dissolved ions in solution. So which means that this rock is more soluble, the sandstones and shales, versus the harder fused crystalline rocks of the Piedmont. One thing I did notice, like in the coastal plain here, you've still got pretty low specific conductance values. That's not always the case, but I think it's because it's in an up-dip section of the Potomac Aquifer. The samples are reflective of water that's still fairly young, that's entered the coastal plain groundwater system, and it hasn't had the contact time to really start working on the mineral grains and get solutes and get ions in solution. 2022, these are groundwater withdrawals that are reported to DEQ from municipal and industrial commercial facilities. I don't have data for residential use. That can be gotten. I just don't have it. And the way you do it is just getting a better idea of, where the wells are, and then use, average household use to try and extrapolate those numbers. So it's doable. But so these are reported withdrawals from, this is quarry dewatering. So, between 40 and 70 million gallons per year. This is a pump and treat from the IBM facility, where groundwater got contaminated, back in the 80s, I think, between 40 and 70 million gallons per year. This is a data center. I don't know if it's exclusively on groundwater, but it's pulling, 30, 35 million gallons per year, presumably for evaporative cooling needs. And I don't know if it's blending water with the, from the Occoquan system or not. And then, or if it's all just totally on groundwater. And then a sort of a smattering of light municipal, probably public water supplies, wells, and so forth. Now, let's contrast it with groundwater demands in 1987. And it's the demands in 87 for municipal and commercial groundwater were like 5 times the number of reported withdrawals in 2022. And that has everything to do with Manassas Park and northern Prince William County and some other service districts coming on to, I'm guessing, the Occoquan system. So switching to surface water, and mainly all out of the Culpeper Triassic Basin. But that is just indicative of what this feature is, capable of producing. And it wasn't even totally fully taxed, I don't think. But it was, withdrawals definitely had an impact on the system. And I chose 1987 because in the Nelms and Richardson report, 1990, they contoured or tried to contour groundwater levels in the Culpeper Triassic Basin. And what pops up are these cones of depression associated with withdrawals from the basin from the Triassic aquifer system in Manassas Park and northern Prince William. And so that just illustrates the potential of the basin to be a drilling target to provide groundwater, which is good news. But that these withdrawals, obviously do have an impact on the system. And it also demonstrates the semi-regional, I call it, nature of this system. And so I'll just sort of sum up with sort of a thought. I'll call it a thought experiment. There's a well in Leesburg in the Culpeper Triassics. I know a lot of you have a lot of questions, and so do I, about what kind of impact will development have on groundwater in the county or aquifer systems in general. And I just sort of stumbled across this just to, it's one story associated with development. But here's 1988, Google Earth imagery. Here is an observation well that's still, that's run by the USGS. And the period of record on it is pretty extensive. It runs back through the 80s, maybe further back. But you can see here's groundwater levels below land surface, 20 feet up here, 50 feet down here. And the water levels hanging out, between 35 and 50 feet below land surface, throughout the 80s. Here's 1988. Here's the well. Let's fast forward to 2002. Got some development going on here. Looks like maybe some tennis courts, some apartments. I'm guessing maybe some townhouses, commercial, maybe supermarket or something. It looks like this is starting to get built up. Groundwaters are still kind of cooking around, 35 to 50 feet below land surface. Kind of the same story, 2005. And then the more development, the trees get taken out of the equation. And all of a sudden, you get this jump in groundwater levels of like 15 feet. And I think that has to do with removal of a big source of evapotranspiration by taking these trees out from the system. And it's letting a big, water in that normally would never make it in there. But then you start to look at this, and as impervious, surface is built, you start to see a downward decline or downward trend in the water level. And the question is, how far is that going to go? Is it going to go below this point? Is it going to level out at the same spot? I can't tell you. Here's 2024. So this is going to be a really interesting well to continue monitoring into the future. And of course, another question is, what's going on with water quality too? This is in the Triassics. It's not a deeply weathered profile of overburden where typically things can get filtered out. It's a fairly rapid entry of groundwater into the system. So this would be a great well. Unfortunately, there's no legacy sample data for this well, I don't think. But it begs the case for sort of getting things in place right now to start this kind of monitoring in other places. And so just in conclusion, just to kind of sum things up, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to say, oh yeah, let's chop down all the trees and, we won't have a groundwater problem anymore, because the aquifer is going to fill up. It's just that it's interesting to me to see such a close link between development and impact to the system. So just couple general remarks. Higher reported withdrawals in the 80s and 90s. I don't know, again, what's going on with residential. Presumably there's been more wells drilled, in that time frame. So it would be interesting to bring in an estimate of those numbers. Historic water use has demonstrated a substantial capacity for withdrawals, mainly from the Triassics. The coastal plain part of Prince William is an actively managed aquifer through a permitted withdrawal system. DEQ manages that because it's coastal plain. It's in what's called the groundwater management area. So if you want a permitted withdrawal, you have to run things through a model to see if it's going to impact the model a certain way. But there's no such system like that in place for the rest of the county. I'm showing my ignorance here. I honestly don't know if there's a groundwater ordinance for Prince William or not. And then the last statement is that, proactive monitoring of groundwater elevations in the coastal plain and pretty much throughout the county, but also the Triassics, where there is potential for unregulated withdrawals, would be, I think, a good idea, just to sort of start getting background data with regard to groundwater quality and also groundwater levels. So with that, I'm going to get off the platform. I saw some questions in the chat. I don't know if I should address those now or
yeah, Brad, you can circle back to them later, but feel free to answer them later. We'll jump into Sam's presentation, but before there is one I think that is quick, and that is from Robert, who is asking how deep do you have to go to reach bedrock in the Piedmont zone?
Oh, it varies. Could be 5 feet, it could be 100 or 120. If you're not hitting bedrock by 120, that's pretty exceptional. But typically 50, let's just say.
Great. So to those that have additional questions, we'll circle back. I want to give Sam an opportunity to share his presentation. So Sam, why don't you come on in and introduce yourself and share what insights you have.
Sounds good. I'm Sam Caldwell. I am a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. I have been with the USGS since 2018. We work pretty closely with DEQ. Brad and I have worked together a few times. A lot of that work is in the coastal plain, as Brad mentioned, with the groundwater management area. My presentation today is going to be on just a primer for understanding groundwater level data. All right. So first things first, what is groundwater level data? Or what is groundwater level? So groundwater level is the distance in elevation from a set datum. Usually when we are doing groundwater levels, it is set to the land surface. Other times we will set it in reference to sea level. And so it's the distance from that datum to the top of the water column in a well. So in these two figures, I have a fractured rock system here. Generally, you only case the top couple of feet of that well, and you would measure from the land surface down to this body of water here. This figure over here is more of the unconsolidated sediment that you might find in the coastal plain. but similar idea. Additionally, groundwater levels can be different in adjacent wells if they are screened in different aquifers or make use of different fractures in rock. So the easiest example is in the coastal plain, right, where you have some wells in this unconsolidated superficial aquifer here, and then a well right next door in a confined aquifer. Those are measuring water levels at two different bodies of water. So that leads to a different water level. Now, this sort of phenomenon is less common in fractured rock systems, but there might be some wells that are making use of more or less productive fractures that are nearby, and just the nature of those fractures in the subsurface, you might miss some that wells nearby are making use of. So how do we measure it? The image on the right is a well at Kempsville High School in Virginia Beach. USGS measures groundwater levels continuously using pressure transducers, which are generally accurate to 0.05 of a foot. And if we're using continuous data, that is recording in 15-minute intervals. So this well over here records data 15 minutes at a time. And then it stores that data in a little data collection platform inside this box, which gets beamed via satellite back to the office. And then the general public can view that water level data up to the last 15 minutes online, if you know the well to look for. So we calibrate these transducers using field measurements taken by USGS staff. Generally, we do that using a steel or electric measuring tape that has been certified for accuracy. And these field measurements are conducted once a quarter for continuous wells. So, you're never going more than 3 months without a control point to make sure that those water level, that the transducer is in fact reading appropriate water levels. All USGS measurements are made as depth below land surface, and then we have altitude measurements for every USGS site, so we can switch back and forth between depth below land surface as well as depth above sea level. Prince William County has two USGS operated wells that are monitored for continuous data. That's shown in the graphic on the right. We have one up here in the northern part of the county, just outside of the Blue Ridge system, if you remember that map from Brad's presentation, and then another over here, sort of in that crystalline Piedmont area in Prince William Forest Park. So again, these are measuring water level every 15 minutes. And those are available in real time online. So I realize you guys can't click this link here, but well 49V1, which is this guy up here, if you Google USGS 49V1, this is going to be the first thing that pops up. If you click it, you can see real live water level data. So this is near the junction of Mountain Road and Loudon Drive. And it's got groundwater level data from 1968 to the present. However, the continuous data starts from 2003 to the present. I believe the periodic data, when I say periodic, that just means somebody going out and doing a manual field measurement with a steel tape. I believe from 1968 to 2003, that was monthly. Then we have 51S7, which is this guy down here. That's in Prince William Forest Park near Cabin Camp 5. The groundwater level data is from 1973 to the present, with continuous data from 2007 to the present. So those are two pretty extensive periods of record, which you always like to see. Generally, it takes about 10 years before we can start being confident about long-term trends in groundwater level data. So what can a hydrograph tell us about groundwater? So a hydrograph is just a graph of the water level in a well. So what you're looking at here, this hydrograph here is the continuous water level data, the entire period of record for well 49V1. That's that well that's in the northern part of the county. So this is going for the from October of 2003 to I think I put this together last week. So this is that continuous data. You'll notice the line is a little bit smoother. That's because you're getting 15-minute data. This graph over here, this is the same well, but this is just with field measurements. So you'll notice there's a higher density up until I think the 80s, and even still through the 2000s. And then once we get to the continuous data, it really sort of tapers off. But this is just to show you the full period of record. So when I look at the continuous data, the first things that immediately jump out are these two lows in 2011 and 2018. We're going to get back to this, but those two lows are a result of what must have been some nearby pumping. When we look at the continuous data from 2003 to 2024, generally that looks like a downward trend of about a difference of 2 to 3 feet on average from the start of the continuous record. However, when we go over to the periodic data for the lifetime of that we've been measuring water level in this well, all of a sudden that trend from 2003 to the present seems more like relatively stable conditions. So that's one thing to always consider when looking at groundwater levels is, how, what kind of context can we put it in? So as I said, median groundwater level is down about 2 feet since 2004, but again, generally stable for the period of record of the well. I mentioned pumping in that slide. These are just some graphics to help you generally understand the effects of pumping on an aquifer, right? So you start pre-pumping with that initial water level, you get drawdown as a result of the pumping, which creates what we call a cone of depression, which locally lowers the groundwater level around your well that is pumping water. Again, over here, when this well is pumping, it's right next to a stream. Normally, you wouldn't be getting stream water in there, but when you start pumping a lot of water, you could start drawing in water from a nearby stream. Also, if you have pump wells that are next to each other, cones of depression can overlap and result in sustained lower water levels between wells, as shown in this figure down here with the interplay between wells A and B. Again, these wells are really showing groundwater systems that are more unconsolidated sediment as opposed to fractured rock aquifers. The flow dynamics are a little bit different, but generally the base principles of a cone of depression, radiating outward from your pumped well, hold true. So we're getting back to well 49 V1. This is a clip I pulled of just the 2 weeks surrounding that 2017 low. This here is what I would generally call a kind of a textbook pumping signal. So generally those are defined by a quick sharp drop in groundwater level. So we start here on sort of late July 11 above 10 feet below land surface. And then we drop 5 feet over the course of probably a couple hours. The point of the V, so right down here, is the end of active pumping, and after this, you're in recovery. So this is that sharp R-shaped recovery curve here. But then you'll notice we're still about a foot below where groundwater was previously. It takes about 20 days to get back to pre-pumping levels for this particular well. That sort of recovery time is going to be different for each well. It's going to be different under varying conditions. I just wanted to kind of show you, right in that last graph, I said these lows are caused by pumping. This is how we can identify when there is pumping on a well. This figure on the right is from a tool that USGS has developed for every continuous well in Virginia. I will share some links to that at the end of the presentation. So this is again working with well 49V1. What this graph does is it puts water levels in the context of all of the historical data for a particular well, assuming that well has more than 10 years of data associated with it. Right, so these ranges, the colored boxes represent ranges of groundwater level as a percentile of the entire period of record for that well. This kind of works the same way as when your doctor's talking about your kid's height at a physical, right? 90 to 95th percentile means pretty high water levels. 5 to 10 means pretty low. However, this is just in the context of this well. Right, so current groundwater levels for 49V1 are pretty low compared to historical statistics. But this well is 165 feet deep. So 12 feet below land surface still means that there's quite a bit of water in that well. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that well is in danger of running dry. So this is that groundwater tool I was talking about. Again, 2 clips from that. So Prince William County is sort of hidden, is over here with your 2 wells here and here. So this tool is great because we developed it in-house. This is the West Virginia groundwater tool. You can sort wells by county, cooperator, aquifer, or water level percentile, but it does limit you to wells that are collecting data continuously. So that is missing out on a significant portion of wells that have data and are still actively collecting data. They're just not doing it in a continuous nature. And so each one of these wells has a site page that does breakdowns over the last calendar year, like this graph. But again, that's only for continuous wells. If you want to find every well on the USGS network in Virginia, the Virginia Water Monitoring Site Mapper is going to be your best friend. That tool can display continuous and periodic wells. It also shows the tide gauge, stream gauge, meteorological stations that the USGS operates throughout Virginia. So for all of your environmental data needs within Virginia, that's a great link to go to. Again, I'll post those in the chat once I'm done with this presentation. So how do we use groundwater level data? It can be very useful, and generally the longer the record, the better. As I mentioned before, at about 10 years of data, we can be confident in trend analysis at a single well. Groundwater levels from multiple wells in the same aquifer and geographic area can be used to make potentiometric surface maps of that water. So if we have a lot of wells that are measuring water level from the same source, we can generate a water level map from that data, which can be very useful. A great example of this is the Long Island depth to water and hydrologic conditions viewer. Our colleagues in the New York office run this tool to show where the water levels are at in the Long Island aquifer system. That's just a very deep, unconsolidated aquifer system. Produces a lot of great water, but is also highly susceptible to contamination. But this is just one example of what we can do with groundwater levels. When we combine groundwater level data with surface water and precipitation data, we can quantify recharge to an aquifer. So we recently did this for Fauquier County and have an online tool showing on a county by county basis the groundwater recharge from, I believe, 1996 to 2015. When we combine with still even more data about aquifer characteristics, we can start modeling groundwater levels. This is a link to a paper that was published using data we collect in Virginia Beach, where we were able to model and figure out what the main contributors are to groundwater level in a certain area or within Virginia Beach in the different aquifer systems there. Where we found out that the superficial aquifer was pretty much controlled by climatological effects, temperature, evapotranspiration, precipitation. And the confined aquifer was controlled by local pumping. Basically, whoever's pumping nearby is pretty much controlling the groundwater level there. Again, that was a Virginia Beach study. So how is this data useful to you? Groundwater is inherently difficult to observe. Unlike a stream, we can't walk outside and look at it, see if there's water there, see if it's changed from yesterday. So you need to have groundwater wells in the right places, preferably for a long period of time. The more data, the better. So continuous groundwater level data helps us understand groundwater availability and how the larger aquifer system responds to stressors like pumping, heavy rainfall, or drought. Periodic data is great too for looking at long-term trends. But if you want to understand phenomena that happen on a shorter timeline, like pumping or rainfall, continuous data is needed to really resolve those kind of phenomena. And groundwater level data can help us understand the capacity, recharge, and availability of groundwater in your area. And that's very important for making sure that your groundwater use is responsible and is going to be preserved, for future use. So I just wanted to point out some recent work we did with Fauquier County. It's right next door. So this is something, if you aren't already aware of, you might be interested in. So we conducted a synoptic water level survey, which resulted in the publication of a groundwater level contour map. This is that map. Myself and 2 or 3 of my colleagues spent a week going around Fauquier County, knocking on homeowner doors and measuring water levels in their wells, getting levels, and then we worked up this water level map of the county, showing you, where water levels are at for different parts of Fauquier County. This is a snapshot. It's not updated in real time. This data was from 2018. That data combined with some long-time stream meteorological and groundwater data was also used to create a soil water balance model. And that model was then used to quantify aquifer recharge in the county, sort of on a local watershed basis. So I realize this explanation might be a little hard to see, but these colors go from less than 2, 2 to 4, up in 2-inch increments, all the way to greater than 14. And that unit is inches per year. And so you can get a good idea of where, at least from 1996 to 2015, where you're getting a lot of groundwater recharge within Fauquier County and where you're getting less recharge within Fauquier County. I've got the full citations for those 2 products down here at the bottom of the slide. And quickly, before I go to questions, I did a quick look through our publications warehouse, which is publicly available, and try to find the groundwater hydrology specific publications. From the USGS, I found 4 publications, the latest of which was in 1997. You saw a good bit of that in Brad's presentation. So that is the end of my presentation, and I suppose Brad and I can take questions at this time. So let me stop sharing and take a look at the chat.
Great, thanks, Sam. I really appreciate the overview from Brad and the geology and how groundwater varies across just the diversity of geology that we have in Prince William County, and then Sam, the overview of the wells that we do have and what monitoring looks like and what we can do with some of that data is really, really insightful, and especially looking at the trend of one of the monitoring wells. It does seem like we would benefit from having more data to gain an understanding of what we might be dealing with here. So I'm going to pass it on to Martin, who will leave the rest of the time for a Q&A. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ashley. And I also want to thank both of y'all for the presentations. I think this is I didn't exactly understand all of the first presentation, but I'm sure a lot of folks did, and I do have some questions on that, and I'm sure a lot of people have questions on both presentations. So let's go ahead and start with the first presentation first. If folks have questions that you're holding that you wanted to ask on the first ones, I don't want anybody to forget their questions. So do you are there any questions on the first presentation? Randy, you have your hand up. Go ahead, unmute.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I actually have questions on both, but they're kind of related. So Bradley, I must say that you blew my mind a little bit with your graph of the time trend in groundwater level in the well that showed a roughly 15-foot increase in water levels after there was a lot more development and higher impervious surface and less evapotranspiration. But that kind of runs counter to what my expectations were. My expectations are that we're much more likely to have groundwater supply problems, i.e. Withdrawals faster than recharge in situations where we have lots of impervious surface and where we've lost tree cover. So can you elaborate on whether you see this kind of phenomenon very often? And does is this sort of, does this look typical to you in other situations where we've got lots more impervious surface? Thank you.
It's really, this is the only time that I've been able to associate the two with any sort of meaningful data. So I'm just as confused as you are. What I think is happening is that you had this situation where the area immediately around the wellhead, for I don't know, tens of acres around the wellhead were forested. And we don't think about it, but trees demand a lot of water, and they're going to get the water no matter what, unless it gets really bad. And they just can't get it anymore, and then they'll start dropping their leaves. But I've been told a big oak tree can pull hundreds of gallons a day out of the ground. So multiply that by a few thousand, and you have taken away the ability of water that's infiltrated into the subsurface to make it down deep, especially in the summertime.
Yeah, so maybe to ask the question a different way, and perhaps this gets into Sam's territory, but when you map the potentiometric surface of, say, a water table aquifer over a county level,
yes,
do you tend to see higher surfaces in impervious areas and lower surfaces in forested areas?
I don't think
that would run counter to what I would expect.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's first of all, the contour interval that you have to set your potentiometric surface map at such a large scale, at a county-wide scale, is gonna kind of erase that level of detail. You can't, we're only talking about a 15-foot jump, and a lot of times the contour intervals on groundwater elevation maps, especially at the county scale, are like 50 feet. So it may not jump out readily. So it gets lost when you're trying to contour over such a large interval. But yeah, I think if you did a local contour map, just at a local interval, say if tens of acre interval around that wellhead, pre-forest and post-forest, you'd see higher groundwater level over the short term. Now, my thoughts on it are that once, after you get that big slug of water coming in due to the lack of forestation, as impervious surface is added, you're obviously removing a readily available source. You're removing the recharge area. So if you keep building up around it, common sense would tell you water won't be able to get in as easily. But it does illustrate to me just the immensity, just such a huge, what a huge proportion of the hydrologic cycle that evapotranspiration really constitutes. And we don't see it. But that was not the point I was trying to make. I'm not saying cut down all the trees so we have groundwater. I'm just saying that land surface changes, man-made changes in the land surface can sometimes have a pretty immediate and profound impact on the aquifer system.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, adding a little color to that, so that Fauquier County water level map that I showed, that the contour interval for that is 50 feet. Now, we had a well there that was, effectively in somebody's backyard that we had a right of way to, that was right by a creek, and we would see a diurnal signal associated with evapotranspiration, higher at night, lower in the, higher in the day, lower water levels in the daytime, higher water levels in the nighttime. But those were big enough where you would see it on a individual well's hydrograph, but not nearly large enough differences to make much of an impact, to make any impact on a countywide scale. And this just gets back to Brad's point in that evapotranspiration is a big part of a water budget. That particular well just does a very good job demonstrating how big it can be.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Brad. I want to get some questions from the chat that were during Brad's presentation. One question is, how much does lawn watering impact groundwater?
It depends on how many lawns are getting watered, but I mean, I would say a normal lawn watering session over a quarter, half acre to an acre parcel. I mean, that's the biggest household use probably for the day. I don't know how many gallons that translates to, but especially during times like this where it's really hot, like in my garden right now, I'm trying to water, but I water at night and I try and limit it as much as I can because the plants need the water, but I would say it's a pretty big impact, but how big, it's hard to quantify.
I can't give you specifics on quantity, but we have some wells. Virginia Beach has a pretty robust groundwater monitoring system. It was set up to evaluate their confined aquifer there for municipal use back when I was in elementary school. But we have some wells in a nice part of town where everybody has really nice, well-manicured lawns. And those are the lowest groundwater levels we see in the entire city. Are in that neighborhood, at least as far as our groundwater level network is concerned. Everybody in that neighborhood's on city water, but they used to be on well water. And so we're fairly confident that the folks there are watering their lawns with groundwater. And we're seeing, several feet difference. I don't know their watering habits, but we can see kind of pumping signals in the data, and the water levels in that specific aquifer are much lower in that neighborhood than they are 30 minutes south in the county portion of Virginia Beach. So don't have specific numbers for you, but if you have a lot of people watering their lawns, all at the same time, it adds up in a big way.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think I guess once you think about this, some of it does go back into the ground when you water your lawn, but a lot of it is evaporation takes a lot of it. So I guess that's where you lose it, is through the evaporation before it actually permeates into the ground and further into the aquifer. Okay, does public groundwater and supply affect private land groundwater? And I think that main part of this question is there something we can do to support the health and supply of public groundwater? And I'm not sure exactly what they mean, the difference between public groundwater and private land groundwater. But if the person asks the question wants to jump in, that'd be great. But that's the question. If you have any.
It was me. I asked the question because I have groundwater, and you know, when we were growing up, they would say, well, you don't go near the groundwater because it comes up to the top of the land sometimes, and then it'll go way down. And mostly the winter it goes down. I'm not an expert in this thing, so I'm probably not using good words, but the idea is that I didn't know if what's on my property do I get that from the same source as the public? You know, you're talking about you know, the different areas where you were going through the map where the different areas have different groundwater and they're higher and lower levels. So does what I have affect it, or is mine just sort of a separate source?
It depends on where you are in proximity to the public water supply well. And
Okay.
it also depends on the geology. So if you're I don't know where you live, but if
It's in a wooded area.
But I mean, if you're in the Culpeper Triassic Basin, it's just hard to know. It's very hard to know. These aquifers and fracture patterns are so discontinuous sometimes. You may have a public water supply well right, 100 feet away, and it may not be affecting you, or it could be having a large effect. It's just hard to tell without monitoring your well water level and then trying to correlate that with the times of pumping of the public water supply well to really know that answer.
So you have to look up a lot of details then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very hard you can't just, all of this stuff hangs on data collection. Really.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know if I ever were to use my groundwater, which I consider mine only because it's on my land, but then,
Right.
you know, would it affect you? Because you talked about the data center, 1 million gallons a year or whatever. And
Yep.
so that, you know, before I criticize them, I'd like to make sure that I'm not doing something either. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Thank you.
Thanks, Selma. I think what we're hearing is from both Brad and Sam is that it would be a great idea if we were able to get some more monitoring wells in Prince William County to keep track of all this.
Yeah, and I would also like to say that as far as up near Ashburn in that area that you were designing there, that maybe there's some changes in the levels, but I certainly don't want to cut down all the trees because they have a much higher value and more value than just simply whether they push something up or down. I just thought I'd let Brad know that.
That's a bad idea.
Sensitive to my trees.
Don't do it.
Thank you.
Okay, and this may have already been answered, so if it has, just you can just say it real quick. How deep is the bedrock layer in the Piedmont zone, or does that vary?
Well, I do want to clarify. Somebody made Charles Grimes made a good point. So the Piedmont I was talking about is the crystalline portion of the Piedmont, and that can be blanketed by a fairly thick mantle of weathering that can range in thickness of 0 to 100 feet or more. It just depends, but most of the time it's in the 20 to 50 foot range of thickness. Now in the Triassic rocks, the Culpeper Basin, that weathering mantle or thickness of overburden is typically much thinner.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Is groundwater only where bedrock exists? And I think I know the answer, but please go ahead.
Sam, you want to do it?
Yeah. So, short answer is no. In crystalline systems, like in the fractured rock systems, like most of Prince William County, you basically have water that's getting in from rainfall into cracks in higher topographic areas, and then they're they're getting into the fractured rock and moving along fractures in the rock towards some local or regional low point. I think Brad had a bit about this in his presentation, but basically the groundwater is pretty much everywhere. Whether or not it's usable is a little bit more dependent upon specifics in your local area. I saw a question about somebody that drilled a well that was right near some other well that produces a lot better, and sometimes that's just the luck of the draw with where you chose to drill your well. Especially, it's true in the coastal plain, but it is especially so in fractured rock systems where you might have just threaded a needle where you don't hit any fractures that produce very good water. Short answer long, groundwater is pretty much everywhere, but whether or not it's usable from a quantity or quality perspective is a different story.
Thanks, Sam. Brad, just kind of along these same lines, on your slide 12, you were talking about ions in the water in different types of formations and so forth. Just so I can understand and everyone can understand, what do ions indicate? I mean, do they indicate a better water quality? Do they indicate more sediment in the water? Or do they just indicate more bits of the rock have left the rock and are now turbid within the water? I'm not 100% sure how that works.
It's basically the rock dissolving into the water.
Is it indicative of quality of the water or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's indicative of the natural, I guess, natural quality of the water. Now, it is what it is, but how that pertains to drinking water matters, obviously. So typically, waters with higher ionic content a lot of times need to be softened. That's what we call hard water.
Okay.
It gets harder to wash your hair because the ions in the water make it hard to, they basically rob the soap of the ability to, cleanse other ions or materials off your hair and body. That's why they call it hard water, because it's hard to wash with. And so, from a personal standpoint, you typically want water with lower ionic content. Also, if you're in the business of supplying public water, it's a hassle to treat water and remove all that from a solution, which sometimes needs to happen because it can form scale over time, on pipes and infrastructure, which is the dissolved materials in the water that are left behind after the water actually evaporates. So that can cause problems as well. It's almost like cholesterol for the water delivery system, just builds up in the pipes over time, especially when it's, and another point to make is that a lot of times this water in these systems, especially down deep where you have really high ionic content, it's not exposed to atmospheric conditions, which means there's no oxygen in the system. And also in extreme cases, pressures can play a role. So when you bring that water up to the land surface, the introduction of oxygen in particular can play a role in causing some undesirable problems as well. So
Okay, thanks. Got to have a question here, and Tanja, I'm going to get to you real quick. I just want to knock out some of these that have been in the chat for a while. Are my wells monitored for PFAS? I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that one too, but and I guess the secondary question would be, can you have your well monitored for PFAS, or is it very expensive?
I believe, Sam, do you want to take this? I know that I think the lab in Virginia that has developed a PFAS protocol, but I don't know if it's available for public analysis or not. I can check on that, but yeah, there's a state lab that I think has a PFAS methodology. This is contaminated. It's so new. A lot of labs don't have the ability to analyze for it.
Yeah, generally speaking, if you want water quality data on your well, you got to do it yourself. If you're the one providing water to your home, then it's on you to understand what's in that water. I want to say VDH has some links about where homeowners can request a sample kit and then mail that water off to a lab to get readouts on important contaminants to their water. I don't know if that includes PFAS. It's still relatively new. USGS only honed in on a proper way to sample that without introducing contamination. Within the last 3 years, because when we do studies with that, we're measuring to parts per trillion. So breathing on it the wrong way could alter your results there. So I think a little bit of digging online might be able to get you that answer. But generally speaking, if you're a homeowner on well water, it's on you to figure out what's in your well. And there should be some state resources to help you along with that in terms of where to go and how to do it.
So that was my question. And one of the reasons I wanted to, and you kind of hit it, some of it, it's very hard to sample for, but I wanted to start a campaign at work called Sample Naked because the requirements for it are absurd. You can't have had a fast food within the last 3 days. You need to be freshly showered, but no product on you, no sunscreen, no bug spray, only natural cloth. So to get down to the parts per trillion that they're looking at, the contamination is just it's so hard to do. It's so hard to find a lab to do it. It's hard to find a lab to do it at a reasonable price.
Yeah, I think
coming up, and it's going to be.
If you're specifically concerned about PFAS, then PFAS is, at least in USGS experience, it isn't terribly hard. We put on some special gloves and then we sample without a sample bag from a raw spigot into a high density polyethylene bottle, which is just a fancy way to say a regular plastic bottle. It's when you get into the pharmaceutical and personal care products that you run into trouble. So if you're looking for those kind of contaminants, then I have my own experiences with water quality sampling for that, where I couldn't wear sunscreen or bug spray or drink coffee that morning or shower with soap the night before, which that's when it gets a little tedious from the sampling perspective. But it's what you got to do to get good data.
Okay, one more question to catch up in the chat, and then we'll go to Tanja. She's been waiting a long time. Appreciate you waiting. Is USGS doing any groundwater modeling for Prince William County?
Not at this time.
And that's a good segue into what I talked about at the beginning with the Sustainability Commission. We are putting together a resolution that we should be releasing later this week that is asking the county to enter into an agreement with the USGS to start a groundwater monitoring program. So just for your information, we are working on that. Okay, Tanja, you are up. Sorry, thanks for waiting so long.
It's okay. Thanks, Martin. Mr. White, you had said before that there was 30 to 35 million gallons per year used at the data center or at the data center out west, right? But you had also, and I just missed what you said it was. There was one that was higher, like 70 million. What was that?
Oh, so two of those, and these are reported withdrawals to DEQ. Anybody that withdraws in excess of 300,000 gallons a month is supposed to report water usage to DEQ. So that's the data I was looking at when I generated that map. There were the two biggest reported withdrawals in 2022 that I came across was dewatering of a quarry, just trying to keep the water out, so that they can continue operations. And that just speaks to the ability of the rocks to, just how fractured and full of water they are at that particular spot. Maybe not regionally or whatever, but those guys are having to pretty much pump day in and day out to keep that facility operational. The second larger source of withdrawal is a pump and treat system associated with the IBM, what was the IBM facility. I don't know if they're even there still. That is associated with the contamination of the local contamination of the aquifer, circa, I guess, early 80s. And they're still trying to clean that up. So, and by pumping, I think the idea is by pumping the system, you're keeping the contaminant pretty much local. You're not allowing it to disperse, throughout to off-site, essentially.
And also, I just had something to add.
Sure.
So I am an earth science teacher at Culligan High School. And if you ever want to put any sort of monitoring well there, I'm sure that Dr. Healy would be so happy with that. For our program, we would love to be able to interact with stuff like that, to be able to do real-time analysis with our students.
Sure, that would be a great way to keep kids interested, get their hands on it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanja. Thanks, Bradley. let me knock off a couple here more from the chat, Randy, real quick, and then we'll get to you. Is there a water recharge map for Prince William County?
Not that I'm aware of. If there is one, it's likely over 30 years old.
And that's presumably, if we did start the process for a water study, that's something we could possibly come up with.
That could be something we could work towards. Yeah.
Okay, great. Just one more, and we'll go to Randy. It's a kind of it's a question. Drilled a well 500 feet from the reservoir, 830 feet deep, and got 2 gallons per minute. How could this be?
Easy answer is the rocks weren't fractured. Mainly just really solid, competent bedrock, and just bad luck.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Randy, go ahead, please. Sorry, thanks for waiting.
Thanks, Martin. Sam, I think this question is for you. Based on what you and Bradley have taught us tonight, we basically have 4 different aquifer types in the county. We've got the Blue Ridge, we've got Piedmont Triassic, we've got Piedmont Crystalline, we've got Coastal. We have 2 continuous monitoring wells in the county. I assume that there's different vulnerability of these 4 different aquifer types. It strikes me that 2 monitoring wells is certainly not enough to detect trends. One other piece of the puzzle is that we have a lot of changes in Prince William County. We've got a lot of data centers coming in. We have 32% growth in population since the year 2000. So lots more houses, lots more roads, lots more impervious surface. So here's the question. How many monitoring wells do we need to detect trends in each of these 4 different aquifers, and to be able to detect them in time to manage them if we start seeing problems? Not a very easy question, I know, but if you can help us puzzle through this, this is one of the things that the Sustainability Commission is grappling with. Thanks.
Yeah, I think a better way to approach the problem might be, where are your biggest areas of concern? I mean, to start, you probably want, at least one in each of the, you want one in each of the different physiographic provinces. But then the question is, where do you put it, right? As we know from some of the other questions, just because you put a groundwater well somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be well connected to the rest of the system. And so I would say, in a world, with a blank checkbook, I would want multiple wells in each physiographic province. But just for basics, you'd probably want one in each, near your areas of greatest concern. If you want to expand out from that, then you start maybe putting, control wells in the same physiographic province that are hopefully isolated from much, man-made disturbances. So you can kind of get a sense of, okay, well, what does the groundwater look like over here, where in theory we don't have any influence from man, and then compare it to areas that are being heavily influenced by human activity.
Okay, and the areas of concern would basically be areas where there's a lot of groundwater withdrawals from private wells and where there's a lot of land use change happening? Is that
would be
how
for,
you would define that?
That would be for you guys to define. Water processes that you're concerned might affect your groundwater, and then put a well there. I'm not supremely familiar with Prince William County, and so we always try to work very heavily with the cooperators to make sure that we're both working towards answering the right question, and doing so in a way that will get the data and hopefully the answers that are most helpful to our cooperators.
Thanks.
Thanks, Randy. A couple more from the chat here. Do you have the water quality information along with recharge rate in Fauquier County?
So no water quality data was collected for that Fauquier County project. It's worth going in and looking at wells to see if they have water quality data associated with them. For instance, well 49V1 has one sample from 1970, where they did your major cation and anions, along with your field parameters, which are specific inductance, turbidity, dissolved oxygen, and temperature. But generally speaking, USGS doesn't do a lot of the water quality sampling that folks think of when they think of water quality. Generally, we're more water chemistry. If that makes sense, we're looking at sort of, when we do water quality work, usually it's around characterizing, chemical signatures of an aquifer. If you're concerned about contaminants, that's, I'm not saying that USGS doesn't do that. I just haven't done it in my experience, and usually it's outside of the scope of USGS's work, because that's moving into more regulated areas where regulatory agencies would have purview, which I think is what the person asking the question is getting at. But yeah, no water quality data was collected for that effort with Fauquier County.
Okay, thanks, Sam. There's two questions here that I think are asking basically the same thing. And I think this was mentioned in one of the presentations that you had online, I think at the USGS website. But anyway, is there a public report detailing the water levels usage analysis for the data centers in Western Prince William County? I think it was Brad maybe that had sources for large uses of groundwater. One of them was the Micron chip facility, I believe. But anyway, is there any kind of a analysis of how much groundwater is being pumped out in Prince William County from the larger users, I think would be the way to frame that question.
All we really that I'm aware of really is what's reported to us by people that cross that 300,000 gallon a month in any one month of the year threshold, and it's reported as groundwater withdrawals. So it can be surface water usage, it can be groundwater usage. But if they are withdrawing in excess of 300,000 gallons a month, they're supposed to report it.
Is that available on your website? I think you showed a link there.
It's not on the website. But it is FOIable information.
Okay. And so if I understood you correctly, kind of a related question that, let's see, the coastal plain has a permitted withdrawal system, but the rest of the county does not. So the areas where there's basically no permits or anything that one would need before withdrawing more than 300,000 gallons, the 300,000 gallon mark, or does that trigger a need for a permit or something? Or
nope. All they have to do is report it. That's it.
So basically, there's no limit on how much groundwater can be removed by an industrial source in Prince William County.
Not as far as the state's concerned.
Okay. Okay, thanks. And so these two were related. Going back to the monitored well in Leesburg that's on, I knew this got a lot of people's attention. It sure did mine too. It got Randy's and mine.
I hope I don't.
That saw an increase in water level with removal of trees and an increase in development. Was the topographical map changes in topography consulted over the years and considered with the water level changes?
Okay, so they're asking, did the elevation of the monitoring point of the well, was that considered as land use changes were made? And if it was done to normal USGS procedures, the datum, if there was a shift in the datum, the reported depth to water would still, the shift wouldn't be associated with reported, wouldn't be what am I trying to say, like impact or show up in the reported depth to water. It would always be relative to I guess MP height. I don't know. Help me out, Sam. What do you?
Yeah. So when we do a groundwater level measurement, every well has what's called a measurement point on it, which is measured to the 100th of a foot, which helps us have a consistent point. So we're always, when we're doing those calibration field measurements, we're always measuring from the same point, from the same height. And generally, I believe it's every 3 to 5 years, we double check where that MP is at. And update that information if we have cause to believe that some second or third party might have changed the height of the MP through some use. We generally do that, but if the concrete pad was to get covered over by dirt, we wouldn't necessarily change the MP at that point, because we're still relative to, we're getting deep in the weeds on USGS technical procedures here. But short of somebody running over the well casing with a lawnmower, which has happened more often than you would think, we don't really set a new MP unless the old one is measurement point, unless the old one is totally destroyed, which just helps with continuity of data record. Generally, even if there is some sort of landscaping going on around the well, it's not enough to drastically affect what you're measuring, if that answers the question.
But that is a good question, and it's probably worth checking out just to make sure before I show that again.
Yeah.
And I think the takeaway from this with this issue with tree removal and groundwater. And I think, Brad, you pretty much made this clear that this was one site, one time. It's one piece of data, and you wouldn't draw any conclusions from this whatsoever. I think that's what we're hearing from you.
Well, and I would also add, then you start to see the decline over time. And so
Right.
it's hard to see what that might continue to do. So it's coupled. So there might be that initial increase, but over time, that might change because the absence of the trees will certainly change. That water cycle, that the transition of the evapotranspiration, or allowing it to kind of filter into the soil versus the runoff of stormwater.
Okay, a few more here. What is the status of the Potomac aquifer? Is it depleting? A state study in 2017 said we are withdrawing at an unsustainable rate.
I know it's being actively managed. There's been a whole lot of work done lately. By lately, I mean in the last 10 to 15 years, with revising permitted withdrawals in the coastal plain. There's also a big project to investigate the possibility of groundwater, like injecting treated water into the Potomac aquifer to help.
I wouldn't say possibility. Hampton Roads Sanitation District is getting their first facility production scale online in 2026. They're hoping to inject, I think at this facility, 16 million gallons a day of treated wastewater. And this stuff is like treated to crazy standards. Name a treatment process, they've done it. HRSD has several patents as a part of this program that they've developed from the wastewater treatment processes they've come up with to treat this water. But the first one of those facilities is going online in 2026, and they will have a second facility that goes online hopefully in 2029, which combined will be doing 50 million gallons a day, ideally. We'll see if they get to those numbers. But ideally, we'll be doing 50 million gallons a day of injected water into the Potomac. So, I don't know about the current state of the Potomac, but it's being actively managed by DEQ. There's not any large users that are withdrawn out of there without DEQ knowing about it.
From what I understand, if there's portions of the system that are still declining, and then others that have leveled out, and has to do with a reduction in withdrawals, and the system is kind of seeking a new equilibrium. So it's kind of hard to really say for sure if it's totally still being pumped unsustainably. But I do know, and also I'm out of my realm of expertise on that. I don't do much work in the coastal plain. So you have to consider the source here. But also, I can pretty confidently say that there's a lot less extraction going on out of the aquifer system than there was, 15 years ago. And that has everything to do with the management of the groundwater permits.
Yeah, so I do almost all my work in the coastal plain, and the permitted groundwater levels, the permitted groundwater withdrawals are way down throughout the coastal plain. And then with the managed aquifer recharge is kind of the technical term for those injections into the Potomac. It's kind of an exciting time to be monitoring the Potomac because there's a lot of change going on. I keep in mind the Potomac used to have water levels that were above the land surface, but that was, when folks were colonizing Jamestown. Now you got to go and, just thinking of some of the wells off the top of my head, some of the ones I visit regularly, you got to go down about 100 feet to get water levels, but the actual sediments for that system don't start until the 500-foot mark at this particular site. So you're still dealing with an overpressured system. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's immediate cause for concern with the Potomac as it is right now, as I think the infrastructure is in place to responsibly manage it. And I think everybody involved from a public and private perspective, public, private, and government perspective are actively working to make sure that resource is usable in 50, 100, 150 years.
Thanks, Sam. I know Ashley's going to probably cut us off here pretty quick. There's a couple of things in the chat here. Is it possible to get private well water level studies done in residential neighborhoods adjacent to proposed large developments and/or data centers? In other words, basically, I think the question is, can you monitor private wells to look at groundwater levels?
You can, but it takes an effort. You have to monitor with transducers most likely, and then you have to factor out the pumping influence or try your best to filter that out to try and get at what's really going on with the trends in groundwater levels. So it's trickier, but it can be done. It's typically something that if it was a focused study, obviously you'd probably have to pay a private consultant or bring, possibly USGS on board to do something like that.
Yeah, my office could do a study like that, but from the perspective of a homeowner, that's the price tag associated with that is not going to be particularly friendly. Unfortunately, doing science to the standard that USGS does, and then making sure that science is publicly available online, comes with a significant price tag, which to a homeowner, when I'm looking at my project budgets, I have to set aside Sam Caldwell private citizen budget mind and think about things from a project perspective. So, technically yes, but with a lot of asterisks next to that in terms of getting that study done.
Yeah, that's probably getting into the realm of a private consultant.
And I had heard before, Ashley and I had a conversation with some folks from USGS previously, and my understanding from them was that a private well, it's not as accurate because the levels go up and down due to, you don't really know what the usage of the user of the well is. So they were saying that they can't really monitor active wells. They have to monitor wells that are no longer active, or special wells that would be set up for that purpose. Is that right?
Yes. So you don't want to be you don't want to be monitoring water levels in a well that is actively being pumped, because then you are artificially changing the level of the water. So generally what we do is we install what are called observation wells, which is the same as any other well. You're just not pumping from it, with the sole exception being if you want to pump that water to get water quality samples. Technically, that could be a well that has a pump in it that you aren't using. But the bottom line being, if you want good water levels, you don't want to be artificially changing the level of that water in the well you are monitoring it.
Okay, great.
Having said that, though, you could monitor those wells and get a baseline for fluctuation in groundwater level. And if you were concerned about some entity coming in nearby, and all of a sudden that level of fluctuation starts increasing or drops with initiation of pumping of said nearby entity, that can still be pretty telling.
Yeah. I should note that the water level in that well will still change due to various external forces, whether it's rain, whether it's somebody turning on a pump nearby, whether it's a drought. It's just we're isolating for nobody is doing anything at the well. So anything that's going on in the well has to be caused by some other force.
Okay, thank you. One more in the chat. So is this correct that there is not yet enough data to accurately assess negative impacts of dense and heavy development, such as data centers, on adjacent wells of nearby neighborhoods?
Correct.
Yep. I would say that's accurate.
Okay, anybody else have anything? I don't see any hands up. I don't see anything else in the chat. And did I miss anything? Anybody have any other questions?
You were pretty thorough, Martin. All right, everyone. Well, we're past 9 o'clock. I think this was a really great conversation, just like I was expecting from this group. So thank you all for joining tonight. And like I mentioned at the top of the meeting, we'll be providing once the video is published, we'll send out that link along with the chat, because there's some great questions and some great responses and resources in the chat. So we'll be sure to provide that as well. And thank you so much to Sam and Brad for spending this time with us. And I look forward to supporting the Sustainability Commission in their efforts to support getting a groundwater study off the ground. I think that this it would be helpful information for us to have, as it is a critical source water for us, and it is also connected to our streams and in the Occoquan Reservoir. So thank you all for being here, and we look forward to continuing this and learning more about our groundwater in Prince William County.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, Martin, for co-hosting with me. It was a pleasure to collaborate with you on this.